Even our youngest daughter, who's adopted been now for many, many years, randomly in the car one day to me about when I go to my next home. This was 7 years after that she was adopted. Yes. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, like how when I came to you, they took me away from that other home.
Wow.
So when they take me to the next home, and I was like bawling, I was like, no, baby, you're staying with us forever. This is your forever home. And she cried and she was like, I'm so glad. But it shocked me. But ultimately what these kids need are families.
Yeah.
They need a home. We're called by the Lord to do that. And so consider what happens if you don't step into that arena. And I can assure you that if you do, the blessings will outweigh the challenges.
She prayed for several years before we got our girls about foster parenting. She would approach me with it, and but my heart wasn't in it. I was consumed with my work. I give her the credit for just being convicted by the Lord to do that.
God knew Fred's more obedient than I am, and so he had to work on me for 10 years because he knew that once he called Fred to do it, Fred would be obedient.
Fred would say yes.
Whereas me, it would be a wrestling back and forth for a while. So.
Welcome to the Open Homes Initiative podcast, where we enjoy conversations to increase awareness around the foster adoptive kinship community. Our goal is to put names and faces to numbers and statistics. And so we do that by just sharing stories, because we believe that your story matters, most importantly to God, and because of that, to us. And so my name is Justin. I get to host this, and I'm sitting here today with Fred and Kim Reich, who have another foster and adoptive story for us. And so if you would, just kind of introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, what you do, some of your background, and the like.
You want to go first?
I'm the boring one. How about I introduce myself? Mostly as mom.
There you go.
But also as teacher. Currently a homeschool teacher, but also certified public school teacher for a few years. Fred and I met in college. And I'm boring.
Simple as that. So how long have you homeschooled?
We've been homeschooling since COVID, but we actually decided to homeschool before COVID, and I had ordered curriculum to finish out the school year after spring break, and then nobody went back, but I was prepared.
Okay.
So that was great.
And that's
And it's funny because I swore I'd never homeschool.
She did.
Because,
She did.
But
because you taught. How long did you teach?
Well, I taught here and there and everywhere, different things, because we moved a lot because of his coaching profession. And so not many consecutive years, but mostly in preschool.
Okay.
But homeschool's been a huge blessing, something that I did not expect.
Yeah.
And God really has blessed us through homeschool.
That's fun. We need to do a whole homeschool podcast next. That may be the next thing that we do. We enjoy that too.
So I'm Fred, and that was something, the homeschool part was something that I had prayed about for several years. Not necessarily that that's what we would do, but just some kind of open door because of our frustration maybe with public school a little bit. And Kim woke up one morning, it was really before COVID hit, and said, I'm going to homeschool. And I was like, I don't know how she does it.
Yeah.
But
it's different than ours.
As far as
Chelsea came to me and Jill said, I think we need to homeschool. And I was like, are you sure about this? Because I was the teacher. And she was, it was more one of those. Woke up one morning and she said, yeah.
I'm an educator. I was in college basketball for 28 years.
Wow.
And she prayed for several years before we got our girls about foster parenting. And because she would approach me with it, and but my heart wasn't in it. I was consumed with my work, and I give her the credit for just being convicted by the Lord to do that. And eventually I said yes to a lot of the training. I said, okay, I'll go through this. I know she was praying a lot before I even started thinking about it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the homeschool thing. I prayed a lot, not necessarily that she would want to do that, but Lord, what's the answer to this for us to teach our girls, our younger girls, and
I love
teach them about the Lord.
I love the give and take that you're talking about, just in marriage and in life in general, the way that the Lord leads one or the other spouse, and then often kind of brings us along, and that's the beauty of the way marriage works.
I always tell people that God knew Fred's more obedient than I am. And so he had to work on me for 10 years because he knew that once he called Fred to do it, Fred would be obedient.
Fred would say yes.
Whereas me, it would be a wrestling back and forth for a while. So it just took little while for us to get on the same page at the same time.
So, yeah.
She stayed after me, though, about the foster parenting. I mean, she did, And then you start hearing stories about children in our city and the need. And she stayed pretty up to speed on the things that she would read and the statistics and the good stories and the bad stories. And eventually, she wore me down. Well, she did a great job. And and it was the Lord.
It's a process. They say in fostering, it takes, from the moment you start to even think about it, 1 to 5 years is the average, right? With 3 being kind of that middle ground of the amount of time it takes for somebody to go, okay, we're thinking about it, to actually diving in. And so what is it that brought you to initially even thinking about it? Did you hear something? Did some scripture pop up? What kind of came to mind, or what brought awareness to it?
When he was coaching at Georgia State in downtown Atlanta, he worked 6 days a week and was home on Sundays.
Okay.
And we only lived there 9 months.
Wow.
But when we moved there, my mom helped us move. And on Sunday morning, she got up and took the girls to the little Baptist church in our little suburb of Atlanta. And she came home and she said, I found you a church and I found you a job. They have a preschool. They're looking for a teacher. And I went the next day, and sure enough, I got a job there.
Okay.
And we went to church there, and we had this fabulous Sunday school teacher, and his wife was the preschool minister type person, and they were adoptive parents.
Okay.
They had one open adoption, they had one private closed adoption, and they were in the middle of fostering to adopt. And they'd already fostered one child that had gone back. But they specifically, that couple and that church, just ministered to us in ways that I had never experienced before. They would call me in the middle of the week and say, hey, come up to the playground, bring your girls, we're going to play. And then while we were gone, the husband would go mow our grass because Fred was working all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like single parenting, but in this really great spiritual utopia for a young mom with little girls, because our older girls were like 2 and 5 that year. And I just watched that mother and dad with their adoptive kids, and especially the foster daughter, and heard her heart for adoption, and just seeing how they functioned within the body of Christ just had a huge impact on me, and just could feel the Holy Spirit. Over the years, I'd hear something and I'd be like, we should be praying about that.
Okay.
We literally prayed. Well, I did for over 10 years.
I was going to say, because fast forward maybe that story a little bit, you had 2 young bio kids at the time, and they were teenagers whenever y'all finally decided to foster?
13 and 16.
Okay, 13 and 16.
13 or 15, about to turn 16, within a month.
So they were young then, and so almost 10 years of praying and coaching. How many coaching moves in that time?
Well, we went from there to Denton.
Okay.
University of North Texas, there for 5 years before we moved to San Angelo.
Okay.
And about 5 years into my job here in San Angelo is when we started taking the classes to be able to foster. And
So is there anything that stands out in your mind as what made that kind of click for you, Fred? Or was it more just we've been here a while, we're more established, we're in a healthy church, we've got a good community, this feels like the next right step?
That had a lot to do with it. And Kim was persistent, in telling me about the need in our city for it and explaining those things. But then also, she would always talk about her conviction about what the Bible says about taking care of orphans and widows and kind of her verse. And we talked about that a lot and discussed it. And then I started praying, time alone even. But we would pray sometimes together about direction. And once again, I was very consumed with my work. And I was, a lot of questions. Coaching profession is very nomadic. You move a lot. And when I moved her all over the country.
You made
We've lived
in
in
20 years.
Memphis, Louisiana, East Texas, all over the place. So anyway, she kept praying. She was faithful.
Yeah.
And the scriptures are very convicting. The testimony of the early church, even in the first century, was one of the things that stuck with me, of taking care of the abandoned, the Roman culture.
Yeah.
And the church exploded in that culture because it was the Christians who would go out at night looking for abandoned babies.
Yes. Yeah.
And would pick them up. And I can say that Kim and I both are adamantly and passionately pro-life. Abortion, I think, is the stain on our nation. It's a monstrous evil. And to not take care of the defenseless was a conviction for us. And even as we got into foster parenting, it became even stronger. It was something the Lord pressed to our hearts, just that human life has dignity and an inherent dignity and sanctity to human life. And even in the womb, but after the womb, because one of the lies of the enemy today is that, well, I'm womb to the tomb pro-life, so we don't do anything for people after they're born, and we flood the world or our country with social programs. Mm-hmm. But then you see the people in the church that have been the ones that have stepped up. And it's a battle raging now for babies after they're born.
I think it is. I think that is one of the interesting parts of San Angelo recently becoming a sanctuary city. Then the natural result of that is going to be, you would just assume, is more kids in the foster system. Yeah. And so then you do ask the question, okay, well, you put your money where your mouth is. Are the kiddos worth it? Or are the stories, right? Are you simply anti-abortion, or are you actually pro-life? Is another kind of way to go about that. And so it is one of the things, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of churches on that side of the equation. And so I think it's interesting you bring up the Roman stuff. A lot of us don't know a lot of that history.
Here go the guys talking about Roman civilization.
It is intriguing whenever you realize that civilization would literally, if they did not want a child, they would take them outside the city and leave them on the side of the road. And then Christians very quickly became known for exactly that, entering into those little stories and welcoming into their homes.
And under great persecution, and during the late first century, and even extra biblical writings will tell us that, what is it about these Christians? They take care of people that aren't their own.
Yes. Yep.
In a powerful witness, and then you see the church explode exponentially in numbers.
Yeah.
In the Roman culture, because God used that as a witness to a culture of death.
Yes. And so, how can we as a church kind of step into a similar situation today? We live in a culture that is very self-centric, that is built on today and what I get out of the here and now. And to enter into the foster care arena is essentially to sacrifice so much free time, so much resources, so much of just often what people might say is prime time of your lives, or making your kids even sacrifice time from their parents. There's a lot that goes into that sacrifice. So let's talk more about your foster care journey. So that the kids were teenagers whenever y'all decided to finally take this step. And then what did it look like once y'all stepped into the foster care arena? How many kiddos have come in or through the house, or did God just bring just one set? What did all this look like?
Our journey is that we set out to just foster with the understanding that if children or a child came into our home that became available for adoption, we would adopt, because we'd feel like that was God's plan for us and purpose for us. And pretty much everybody that we met in the foster care arena was fostering to adopt and had several placements that they thought they were going to adopt, then go home. And were experiencing that loss. And so we did a week of respite care for 2 little girls, a baby and like a 3-year-old. And then the week after Christmas in 2011, we got a call for our girls. And that was interesting because we had not planned on fostering more than one at a time. We were...
We didn't talk about 2.
We were dipping our toes in.
That's it.
And we had about a 5-hour window to make
I tiptoed into this thing. I went to the classes, and now all of a sudden, wait, 2?
And then I called him. I was like, there's these 2 little girls, and they're 1 year old and almost 3, and what do we do? And he's like, we've got to take them if they need a home. And it was supposed to be an emergency placement for just 24 to 48 hours. And I was like, okay. And they did have grandparents that were willing to take, but they were 2 different paternal grandparents, and so each only wanted theirs. And so that's the reason the girls got left with us. Yes, it's because the grandparents wouldn't take both at that initial call, and we did. And so they just left them with us. And then as the parents kind of worked through the system, they just stayed with us. And actually, our older daughter's paternal grandparents, they were foster adopt parents.
Okay.
Their grandmother on the paternal side worked at CPS for 11 years and had adopted their the older one's biological father and siblings. And so they actively pursued getting custody of her and were approved for home visits. And she had like one visit with them. But one of the aspects of foster care that I think lacks in training is the legal aspect of it and the ways that foster parents can participate in the legal process for the foster children.
Okay.
And that was something that I kind of jumped into, not realizing that most foster parents did not do.
Right. No, let's don't.
But I got wind that they were having one of their many hearings that they have, meetings. And so we went to the very first initial meeting with all the biological family there, all of the CPS caseworkers there. I mean, it was like a huge meeting.
Yeah.
And Fred was outside chit-chatting with this man and friend from work. And then we all walked into the same room, and it was our oldest foster child's grandfather, paternal grandfather.
Okay.
And so once he realized that we had her, and he and his wife, then they felt better about it. And then even though they were pursuing custody of her and visits and that, she ended up having a medical situation.
Okay.
And they came back and said, no, we want y'all to have her. We know she's safe with y'all. So it's pretty remarkable.
I knew this guy well, too. I know him well. The co-worker.
Wow.
We don't stay in touch closely, but we do stay in touch.
What are you doing here? I said, I got a meeting. Oh, me too. And I go down the hall. We go into the same room, and we both just start crying. But we didn't know.
We
didn't know where she was. This was probably 3 months in, probably, wasn't it?
Not quite that long. It was like probably maybe a month and a half in.
Wow. And God, in some sense, orchestrated all of that to bring comfort and both to y'all and to them.
Yeah.
So that you ended up with one placement, essentially, and then that ended up in adoption.
It did.
Right?
And we probably would have kept our home open to foster kids, except for two things. The most important one being our daughter, who's now 16, really struggled with feeling secure in the home and not feeling like somebody was about to come rip her out of the home and on to the next one.
Yeah.
And even our youngest daughter, who's adopted, they've been adopted now for many years, but even about 2 years ago, she said something randomly in the car one day to me about when I go to my next home. This was 7 years after that she was adopted. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, like how when I came to you, they took me away from that other home.
Wow.
And so when they take me to the next home, and I was like bawling, I was like, no, baby, you're staying with us forever. This is your forever home. And even if something happens to Dad and I, because we are older parents, you've got Jesse, you've got Allie, they're going to take care of you, forever.
Yeah.
And she cried and she was like, I'm so glad, but it shocked me. But we knew that the older one struggled with anxiety over that kind of trauma. So we didn't feel like we could have children coming and going and her really settle in. And so we didn't continue the foster care journey after we did.
That makes sense. Every
And it
time
was
somebody
difficult.
leaves.
Yeah, it was difficult.
And the other thing was we couldn't pass a fire inspection in our house.
I know that feeling.
Somebody need a $5,000 sprinkler system.
Yeah, I'm not. We're not putting in a sprinkler system.
Fire inspection is something that,
We were in the courts for 3 years.
3 years.
Parental rights were terminated a year in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it was about another year and a half because the maternal grandmother was trying to get custody, and she managed to get I'm assuming pro bono lawyer out of Austin trying to make a name for herself in the courts in that arena. And she came in and she raised some strange question in the court. And the judge ruled on our behalf, but then it went to appeals. And so it goes to the appeals court. And at that point, you have nothing. You can't go to the court. You can't do anything. You don't even, because it's really between CPS. It's not even us, even though we had intervened in their case at that point legally. So we just sat there for a year and a half waiting for the appeals court, waiting for it to get on the docket. As soon as it went on the docket, they ruled.
One of the things that made it difficult for me was that But during that time, I got fired from my job at Angelo State. I was told I had another year, and 2 weeks later. So normally I'd be looking for another coaching job.
Right.
So that's
moving.
Which would be moving.
But because we were in the courts, we couldn't leave the county.
Okay.
Because we'd have to give them up. So it was really another thing where the Lord used that to get me out of coaching, which, very difficult at the time. It crushed me. But now I'm so thankful. It's one of those things, hindsight, God sees ahead, the providence of God working in that situation. My wife being faithful, us being faithful to take care of these girls. And then the Lord used it to bless us and make me a better dad. Wow. Because we felt like we had a do-over. And I'm around for my older girls now because I wasn't just constantly on the go.
Right.
So, very difficult, but, you got to go through it to get to it. Is that what you tell your players in basketball? It was such a blessing because it got me out of coaching. I could have taken another job, but I wasn't going to leave my family, and we certainly weren't going to give those girls up because the moment they hit our door,
they were ours.
It was over.
Really?
I was done.
You were done.
I'm done.
The moment they hit the door, we're only here to foster. Oh, wait, hold on.
Well,
and if they'd have taken
hours, Riley was calling him dad.
Yeah, and it would have crushed me.
Yes.
If they had been taken.
That is one of the difficult
The Lord knew what he was doing. It would have absolutely crushed me.
And so y'all's hearts are fully given over to these. You're wrapped around their finger. How about the older girls? They're now how old? The two bios are now...
Allie's 29 and Jesse's 27.
And what would they say about the whole journey? Because Briley and Berlin are now... Briley is about
16.
She's my middle daughter's age, and they get to do some different sports and different activities together. Mm-hmm. And so it's been fun to watch that. What is their relationship like with the older girls? You just mentioned being older parents. Yeah. Y'all aren't that old.
People at work ask me, "Hey, are these your grandkids?"
My baby's the grandkid.
I'm not a grandfather.
But yeah, so like they're asking that question. If something did happen to us, then your sisters are here. And so I'll expound a little more on kind of their heartbeat, their relationship. What does that look like?
I'll let Kim talk, but it was difficult, because we had our two older girls and they were the ones, and then we get these new people in our home and
under 3, but right? They were 3 and under. So they take a lot of time, a lot of energy
and share their bedrooms.
Okay.
We didn't have a 5-bedroom home, but what it's done over the years is incredible.
Yeah.
It's just, Kim probably be better explaining that, but even Jesse's 27 and one of the reasons she got into dietetics, she's a licensed dietitian, was because of the difficulties that Emberlyn had with food. When we first got her, she was 11 pounds, a year old. She was hungry, but she hadn't really had a solid food introduced to her. And so all the difficulties that came with that for us, but it made Jesse want to get into being a dietitian. And then, of course, Allie, our oldest daughter, she's a free spirit, but she's so gifted in many ways, but I think she's had a lot of influence on the younger girls.
Mm-hmm.
Allie was just turning 16, which is such a fun age. When the girls came, and she was very active in tennis and sports and had a lot going on in high school. And so we kind of fit into her world, not the other way around. And then she went off to college on tennis scholarship, and then she wound up at a junior college. And then after that, she went to the Master's University in California to finish her degree. And so she was in California for 2.5 years. And when she graduated, she came home. She didn't have a significant other, and she's very extroverted, and she didn't want to live alone. But mostly she came home because she had matured at that point to where she realized what a blessing and gift these girls were, and they were adopted now, and she wanted to be part of their world.
Wow.
And so she has lived with us since college and pays rent. It helps in many ways. But she wanted to be a part of helping with them and be there for them and just be a part of the family, because she realized, looking back, that her years with them from 16 to until she left to college, she was pretty self-centered, and she missed out on that. And so she's been a very big part of their lives since she came back.
That's fun.
And then, but both of them, the older girls, are very grateful for the foster adopt journey, and both have a heart for adoption now, and both have said that at some point they intend to adopt.
That's where my girls are as well. They talk about it.
Well, and my adopted daughters also. Like they have a heart for adoption too, because
they've walked that road.
I tell Kim too, the ripple effects of us having them in our church and other believers doing the same thing. I'm not saying they copied us, but you've got families in our church, multiple families.
Right.
And I know, Ryan Connell, I think started that, and some of his leadership with the youth in our church. And we've got a lot of other families that became involved in that.
Yeah. I mean, that's y'all's story too, all the way back in Georgia. Seeing and witnessing that, and the ripple effects begin to just continue to ripple. That's one of the things that we tell these stories here. That's one of the goals for us, is to help increase some of those ripple effects. So what is maybe the most surprising thing that you've learned or that you didn't expect? And you can just repeat if you want some of the other stories that you've already mentioned. But what's the most surprising thing from this journey? What's the biggest takeaway?
I would say the faith of these young girls, that they follow Christ. That's been the greatest pleasure for me, probably for Kim too, that to know that they love the Lord, they know the Lord, and I think it's strengthened the faith of my older girls.
It's strengthened my faith. That's my biggest takeaway, is this has been a faith journey for me, seeing God work miracles, literal miracles in their lives, the girls' lives, but in all 4 of our girls and our lives. It's just been one instance after another of his provision and his faithfulness to them and to us as a family. And it's just really grown my faith in ways
you might not have seen it.
I just can't imagine I would have if they hadn't been a part of our world.
Right. Wow. So if there's one thing that you could tell potential foster families or people considering entering into this arena, what would it be?
It's a great blessing.
Okay.
It's not easy.
It's not
easy.
The blessings outweigh the challenges. I would say consider the children and what would happen to them if you don't take them. Because you can offer clothing, meals, food, money, babysitting, all those things all day long. But ultimately what these kids need are families.
Yeah.
They need a home. We're called by the Lord to do that. And so consider what happens if you don't step into that arena. And I can assure you that if you do, the blessings will outweigh the challenges.
Yeah, I would agree. As we've walked into this, and we went the foster route as well, the goal of fostering, not adopting. If adoption comes up and we feel called to that, then we would. But we've had 15. Ours kind of went the exact opposite direction. We've had 15 come through. We've got 2 right now. And exactly that is one of those things that weighs on me. Knowing that in our area, in our community, there are kids that have to go to other places because there's not enough families that are opening their homes to them. And I love the way that you just kind of tied that in, brought that back together. What if, right? These kids deserve, do they need, is there a reason why they should be spending a night in an office when we've got the blessings that we have here and the like? And so, yeah, thanks for drawing that out. Any other last thoughts? I would
encourage anyone, if you pray, do it.
I do have one story I want to share about the Lord's provision, and just an example of how he's working behind the scenes in ways that we are not even aware of. When we were in the waiting period, waiting for the appeals court to rule, it was Allie, our oldest, was about to graduate from high school. And I saw on the docket that the appeal had gone through, that they had ruled in our favor. And I knew that meant we were going to get to adopt. And so I called the attorney and I was like, can we get this on the calendar for the weekend of Allie's graduation? Because family will be coming in anyways, and we can do one big celebration. Yeah. And we're sitting there and he's like, yeah, we can do it. So it's on the calendar. And then they're waiting for this piece of paper to come from the appeals court saying that it actually was ruled on. And it's not coming, and it's getting later and later, and it has to be here by a certain day. And I finally called to the appeals court operator and said, hey, look, this is the story. Is there anybody up there that could help out? Hold on, let me get you to this intern. And this intern hears this story. Yeah, I got you. I'll take care of that. And he did. And I'm thinking, wow, that's so cool. And I did that. And then a week after their adoption, our agency caseworker came by to check on us or something. And she said, we didn't tell you about this when it was happening, but the week of your adoption, our agency had to shut down all adoptions because we had a family that had an unfortunate incident in another town. And because of that, our agency had to halt and put a complete stop to all adoptions. And she said, but I went to battle for you guys because y'all been through so much. And I told them, you cannot stop this adoption. It's Friday. It's this week. It has to happen.
Yes.
And I was just sitting there in tears thinking, all that was going on behind the scenes.
Yes.
I'm thinking the calendar's the big challenge. But God was working all that out behind the scenes without us even knowing it. And there had been one thing after another just like that, where, before we even knew there was a problem, God had already met the need.
That's exactly like him. And that kind of ties right into our slogan, I guess, for the podcast, right? Your story matters to God. And that proves it right there, right? And if the story matters to God, then it should absolutely matter to us. And so that's our challenge, to step into these stories, to continue to tell these stories, to enter into these lives, and to do it all for the sake of the gospel and the advance of his kingdom. And so thank you all for what you do. Excited to see Jolly and Briley build into some more relationships over time. Maybe you can come coach some basketball with me. We could use that. Let's get Briley into this thing. We had a game at 12 o'clock today, man. You could have pulled it out. We lost by 1 point.
Oh, man.
We needed you. Yeah. Thank you all so much for doing this. Excited to be able to share your story and looking forward to it. Thanks for watching this recent episode of the Open Homes Initiative podcast, where we believe that your story matters to God, and as such should matter to us. We hope that you've enjoyed this, that you're inspired by it, that it's created a little more awareness, and that you'll begin to partner maybe with us in the system, or like in this episode, with other organizations